everyone, and welcome to the Auto Industry Panel for Google VetNet Career Week. I'm Laura Merling, Managing Director of Digital Transformation for Google Cloud Automotive, and I'll be the moderator for this discussion. For the next hour, I'm honored to talk to 5 wonderful panelists from the automotive industry. The purpose of this panel, like the other industry panels that we're hosting, is for you to hear from representatives of different companies talk about their experience in working in this space and understand what type of roles are available and hear recommendations on getting your foot in the door. We hope by listening to these stories, you'll have a better sense of what it means to be in the automotive industry and to better inform your career aspirations. Jen, Ryan, Scott, Doug, and Alan, thanks so much for joining us today and for giving back to the veteran and military spouse communities. I'd love to start by going around the panel and having each of you introduce yourselves. Tell us who you work for, what role you have, and what branch of the military, if you're a veteran, or what branch you think is the coolest if you're a civilian ally, and what you love most about working at your company and specifically in the automotive industry. All right, so let's start with you, Jen.
Yeah, that sounds great. Jennifer Vescio, so good to be with everybody today. I am the Chief Business Officer at Uber. I've been there for a few years now, and prior to that, I spent 25 plus years in technology, but in all different sectors. I've been in sports, as maybe some of you saw, and I've been in commerce, financial services, and now automotive. And what I absolutely love about what's going on right now is that just being in transportation, the automotive industry, mobility is just the most disruptive thing happening right now. And so it's so fun to be at the cutting edge of innovation right now related to that. And our company is super fun to work for because we've got great people who are focused on impacting people's lives. It's mission driven. We learn a ton every day, and the people I work with are super smart. In terms of the military, I'm a civilian ally. My father was in the Army, so of course it's the coolest. And I grew up in an Army family. And my grandfather actually was in the Italian Army and was taken prisoner by the U.S. Army. It's a really good story. I'll tell you guys someday. But anyway, grew up with the Army, so they got to be number one in my heart. And really happy to be here today.
All right, thank you so much. Okay, Ryan.
All right, thanks, Laura. Hi, everybody. My name is Ryan McNamara. I lead operations for Waymo. Waymo is a autonomous vehicle company inside of Alphabet, and so Alphabet is the parent company for companies like Google, as well as others. And we are the autonomous vehicle arm of that company. I've been in tech for about 10 years now. I started at Apple in a variety of supply chain and operations roles, and then moved over to Nest, and was acquired into Google through the acquisition of Nest. It served a couple roles within Google, and then made the move over to Waymo about 1.5 years ago. What I love about Waymo is, I say it a lot, but we're building first and only things all the time. Right now, my team leads the world's first and only fully autonomous ride-hailing service in the world. Today you can take a ride in a fully autonomous vehicle in the greater Phoenix area without a safety driver up front. And to be able to talk about that and operate that and build all of the things needed to ultimately make that successful has just incredible, and extremely rewarding. My military background and my favorite branch of the service, actually my father was in the U.S. Navy as well. I was in the U.S. Navy. I was a pilot. I flew the F-14 and the F-18 Super Hornet for 10 years, and then transitioned to the business world by way of business school. And that's when I started my tech journey.
Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, Doug, you're next.
Hello, my name is Doug Garrett. I work at Stellantis. Stellantis is kind of a new name in the automotive industry. It's a combination of what would be previously Peugeot, a French company, and FCA, which is a US and Italian company with Fiat Chrysler. I'm responsible currently for the IT dealer and field network for North America. So I work a lot of technology solutions. We're going through our own digital transformation, very focused on the customer. And of course, we've got to look to the dealers in our field to be able to sell those vehicles. In Stellantis, you may know of brands of like Jeep, iconic brand, of course, Chrysler, Dodge, Ram. But we also now have with this combination, now Stellantis. We have Opel and Peugeot and many other European brands that are out there. We have about 300,000 employees in the company, so we're a very large company. Some familiar faces, or at least companies on here, because we do have some agreements or discussions with like Waymo and et cetera. So we have in the past, of course. I am actually ex-military in the Navy. So awesome, Ryan. Ryan was flying aircraft. I was actually the opposite. I was on a nuclear submarine. So you go from one extreme to the next. So I spent almost 8 years on the nuclear submarine force, working on nuclear weapons, and thankfully didn't have to launch any of them. And the last couple of years I was on shore duty, and that's where I spent a lot of time, really focused on my education prior to getting out. So I went in 1986, so I'm dating myself a little bit, and I got out in 1994. I joined Chrysler Corporation at the time in 1997, so I've been there 24 years now.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thanks.
Excellent. All right, Scott, you're next.
Hello, I'm Scott Rumfield. I am here with Ford, and my background is I spent 11 years in the Air Force. I was military intelligence while I was in, so I was briefing people like Ryan before they went on their flights. And after I got out, I went to Washington, D.C., worked in defense and in those areas. But while I was there is when I got really involved into kind of the IT area, and kind of worked my way around through IBM and ended up at Ford through a bunch of my networking and kind of those ways of traditionally working through here. I'm not from Michigan, although I live here now. I'm originally from Pennsylvania. So that network really helped out. Ford, as you guys know, and as Doug kind of went into a little bit about Stellantis, Ford is a pretty big company too. Not quite as big as Stellantis, but iconic products like the F-150 and the new Mustang Mach-E. I'm lucky enough to be able to lead some teams that are building IT technologies around supply chain and the material cost that goes into building those vehicles. And I've been with Ford right now for 6 years.
Great. What do you love most about the automotive industry?
The change. We're going through some gigantic changes right now with moving from traditional internal combustion engines to going to battery electric vehicles, going to autonomous vehicles, as Ryan talked about. And we've got a lot of change going from the old ways to the new ways. And it's very exciting.
It is, isn't it? There's a ton going on. All right. Alan, you're next.
Yes, pleasure to be on here. Thank you, Laura. So my name is Alan McClinton. I work at Tesla. I am a program manager in the home charging team. And so very specifically, my mandate, my North Star is simply to make sure that globally, as people purchase our Tesla cars, that there's a stressless and seamless happy path for them towards getting a home charging. And so with electric vehicles, you no longer have to go to a gas station anymore. You can simply, much like you plug in your iPhone at night, you can be able to plug in your Tesla overnight and just simply wake up and you are full for a charge. And so that's my mandate, is to make sure that can be operationally executed with great customer experience all across the globe. I was a Marine Corps officer, and so I have much love for the Army and the Department of Navy and the rest of the forces out there. And so in the Marine Corps, I was a desk officer, so I used to plan the control air points that Ryan would go on a close air support mission. the thing that I love about the automotive industry, and Scott, you hit it right on the nail, is that there's tons of changes. There's been a change in my own mentality. I didn't join Tesla because I was an electric vehicle phenom. I was like, just come here and work here because, it's tons of innovation. But I was like, I'm going to stay and be, I'm going to be true to the gas guzzler, to the Ford F-150. But, I have to say, I've been completely converted. I will be putting down for that Cybertruck. I will be, my whole family will be in some type of Tesla Model S or X or Y. I've been truly converted, and it hasn't been converted because of, I've given up on speed. I would say that I'm driving in vehicles even faster, faster than my motorcycle GXXR. So anyhow, I'm stoked for the speed that's in the electric vehicle in this automotive industry. So glad to be here.
Thanks, Alan. Well, let's start with you. So how did you actually get into the industry? What was your start?
Yeah, so as soon as I got here out of the military, I got my first sales job in Silicon Valley. I knew I wanted to be in an entrepreneurial setting. And so one of the military recruiters just said, hey, I want a sales position. I know I want to be on the revenue side. Get me any position. And so the sales allowed me to interact and get good iteration with all the big industry players. So I was selling into Google Cloud as they were building out their cloud infrastructure. I was selling into Microsoft and Azure and Facebook. And so I got a really good step in the door in all these big companies. And it really allowed me to see like, okay, where is it that I have a really deep interest? And I saw that with Tesla, they were one of my customers. I was like, man, that is a company that I want to work for. They have innovation. They have this kind of culture around iteration. It's mission driven. And so I contacted the veterans. I literally looked up veterans on LinkedIn, and I started to reach out and say, hey, would you be willing for an informational interview? And through, I would say, about 2 or 3 informational interviews, they're like, you're the type of person I want to introduce you to someone else who's hiring on his team. And the Supercharging organization was hiring. And that's how I got into Tesla. The veteran network, I would say, is intimate, it's close, and very powerful here in Silicon Valley.
Excellent. Well, and I want to go back to Scott because I know you talked about using your network quite a bit. Can you tell us your story about how you got into automotive?
Yeah, it was kind of by happenstance. I wasn't. I grew up with the brand and the, it being an icon kind of in my family, kind of growing up. And I would say that I kind of fell into it. I had wanted to get into Ford for a while, and I had been involved in some of the Ford networks within IBM. And it just happened that somebody had left IBM. They were working on a Ford account. They had left IBM. They had went to Ford. I had applied, and it was just by luck my resume had come in, and they had known my name from the veteran network at IBM. So it was by happenstance. It was a extended network, if you will. And kind of as Alan says, 1 + 1 a lot of times will equal 3 or 4 within these networks. And that's kind of how it happened. And I got a call one day that they wanted to talk to me. They talked to me and then referred me to the people that were interviewing.
And I think there was a story, if I remember correctly, when we were talking beforehand about your passion for Ford started when you were a kid, if I remember right.
Yes. I grew up, I worked on a farm as growing up, and we had, Broncos and F-150s and Ford tractors and everything like that, working on cars and helping my dad and my uncle rebuild, Mustang and all that kind of stuff. And I remember them back in those days, as those of us that remember the cars were big and the engine compartments were even bigger. And I was what I like to call the gopher. Go for this, go for that. And, I was thrilled when they picked me up and put me in the engine compartment and said, hook up this spark plug wire and tighten this screw and all that kind of stuff. So it just really cemented the love of the brand from there on.
Yeah, that's great. I love that history. All right, Doug, how did you get into the industry?
Well, so prior to getting out of the military, I was Charleston, South Carolina, my shore duty at the Polaris Missile Facility. And I knew I was going to come back to Michigan. And geographically, when you think of Michigan, you think the automotive industry. My parents all worked in the automotive industry, so I just knew I naturally would probably gravitate towards that. Prior to getting out, what I did was I looked for something that would transition me over to the civilian life, right? I talk about nuclear weapons, and how do you translate that into the automotive industry? A little difficult. What I ended up doing was actually volunteering, and of course, military, we all volunteer. But I did volunteer for a thing called Total Quality Management. And what it was the Navy's kickoff of kind of a quality management system to help drive quality in everything that we did within the Navy. Because we do a lot of preventive maintenance, we do a lot of procedures, especially on the weapons that I worked on. Everything had to be done in a certain sequence, so quality was a huge requirement. So I took that, I volunteered, I got involved, understood quality management, started to understand quality engineering, and started to actually teach it. My last year teaching civilians and Navy around total quality management. That, when I came back to Michigan, actually got me right in the door. First job, I worked as a quality lab technician, setting up testing for a company called Microcraft. I'm not even sure they're in business anymore, but they made switches that go into the doors for a lot of the Ford products. So that's where I kind of got my foot in the door in the automotive industry. And then at Chrysler, I jumped around quite a few times. I worked as a quality manager at a packaging company called Turnus Packaging. So they huge supplier to Ford and Chrysler. They do a lot of service parts packaging. Worked at Delphi for a couple of years. But my break at Chrysler was actually by luck. I ended up submitting an application for a job I found, and the actual interviewing senior manager, I think it was his nephew, and again, dating myself, it was 24 years ago. I can't remember if it was a nephew or a son. It was a relative. Was a helicopter pilot. So he had this huge respect for veterans and people that were in the military. Not only that, in talking to this relative, he knew of the leadership that you get in the military. So that was really my big, it was pure luck, but yet my background in the military is what really, I think, got me the job at Chrysler. So that started my career, and now Stellantis.
Excellent. Thank you for sharing. Ryan, now, when you go through this, I'd like to also have you talk to us a little bit about not just how you got your break, but also a little bit about how you navigated from a career perspective. Like, how did you know where to start on your path and your journey? I think Doug gave us a little bit of that as well, but I'd love for you to add that.
Sure. Yeah. I hate to say it's luck like everybody else. Because it's never really luck. Like, you have to have some skill set, but I do think that there's a lot about the veteran network that creates a bit of luck for us as we navigate our career, and I think it's support as well. My break came from business school. I knew I wanted to transition to the business world and be impactful there. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up, if you will. Other than be impactful in the business world. And so went through recruiting processes, actually was prepared to take a job with Raytheon. And Apple, I had gone through the recruiting process. They said, hey, we really like you. We think you're a great leader. We don't know what to do with you. You don't have a tech background. So by all means, take the job with Raytheon. And then they called me back at the 11th hour. And it turns out that the recruiter, her husband was a Navy pilot. And so she didn't get me the job, but she made sure when the person who rejected the job that I ended up taking made sure that I was at least at the top of the list. Like, hey, what about this guy? Everybody loved him. They didn't know what to do, and the VP who hired me said, "Yeah, love it. I'll take him." And so, yeah, a little bit of luck to get the break, but along the way, navigating. For me, a couple themes were, know what you know and know what you don't know. So I came into tech with zero tech background. I was working on the iPhone. We were scaling. It was 2009. We were scaling incredibly rapidly, and I didn't know much about how to put a phone together, or how all those bits work together. But I was willing to ask a lot of questions along the way, and I found the smartest person in the room. He's still the smartest person I know. He was a colleague, and I would just pick his brain every day. And tried to get as smart as I could, as fast as I could, and never really tried to fake it at any point along the way. Navigating to next role at Nest was, knowing that I was bringing that's kind of the second theme is, bring something forward, bring a skill set forward with you into your next role. So some value add, but be willing to not have everything you need to be successful, and be willing to learn that those other bits along the way. And so moving into program management roles at Nest was again bringing, like Alan said, bringing some operational capability and ability to put things together and move them towards a goal, which I'd learned in the military and at Apple. Towards a different thing, building thermostats, and program managing and chief of staffing in a growing company was how I navigated that. But again, always looking to learn something new while bringing some value forward. And then, similar to where I am now, having had a supply chain background previous, moving into the fleet operations role here at Waymo, knowing that I could do operations roles and be successful at operations roles, but also being willing to say, yeah, I'll learn the fleet side of it. I have confidence that I can learn the fleet side of it. And then having to do it during COVID, you learn really fast. And so again, just that theme of bringing something forward and then being willing to learn along the way has served me well.
Yeah, well, you also, I think, gave me some examples of the difference between your experience in the military and launching the iPhone. Do you want to share that here? I thought it was an interesting juxtaposition.
Yeah, I always like to say the military is stressful in short bursts, and extremely stressful in short bursts. Tech is constant. The stress is constant, especially when you are in a growth environment like we were on iPhone, and again here at Waymo and other places I've been, Nest, is just this constant grind, and it can be. You have to take care of yourself. You have to be in it for the long term. You have to make sure that you don't burn out along the way. But it's very rewarding in that it's very engaging, and it feels like others have said, it feels mission driven and it feels important. And it's certainly exciting as you do it. But again, it's constant, and the demands are and the stress is there a lot.
Yeah, that's a great lead in to Jen. I know that I'd love for you to share your background, but I also know you've done some coaching along the way as well, right? And still do that, mentoring. So
yeah, it's crazy.
Share with us.
Yeah, two transitions probably are significant here. One is, I started, on the playing field coaching college. I coached some of the women's national team soccer players here in the United States, and I was basically a sports coach, and I knew a lot about that. And transitioning into tech was, you can imagine, I gave up stadium lights for fluorescent lights, right? And the whole language was different. The game plan was different. The language was different. So in terms of experiencing, just career transitions, I went through a big one, and it was shocking at first, right? There's a lot you have to learn in terms of the language. What worked for me in that transition, and just thinking about this, is, it doesn't matter if you're going from military or college or just between industries. I was able to secure a job in New York working with college students and helping them find their first job. So I knew the audience, I knew the customer. I ended up in a product role, and I didn't know anything about product, but I was willing to take a service mindset and being in service of others, and ask lots of questions and know myself really well, and just basically learn on the job. And again, got a little bit lucky. My networking was very sort of intentional. I found the job also through a friend of a friend that went to college with somebody, and that really worked. And so I think having those two sort of safety nets got me running. And the second transition, it was funny, Ryan, you mentioning that, fast forward 25 plus years, I did burn out in tech, and I took a break. I took 2 years off starting in 2015. I had worked at various startups, eBay, ESPN. I was at big companies, small companies. I had always been in service of the automotive industry, whether it was doing deals with like the Garmins of the world or trying to build a search engine for autos, things like that. So I had been familiar with it. I ended up taking a break. And to your point, Laura, I took 2 years off because at the end of the day, I needed to just sort of get back to what's important to me, like what matters at this point. And I spent a lot of time just realizing that like helping other people have an impact on the world is sort of what gets me going. It's what brings me joy. And I have a side business that basically is half venture capital, investing in people that want to start their own businesses, but also help them with executive coaching and career transitions, believe it or not. Look, when I ended up at Uber, the three things I'm in search of high impact mission driven companies where you're constantly learning, super people, and disruption. And you've heard it from Scott and other people. There's not a better industry to be right now than, an Uber right now in this industry and trying to disrupt it. And that's what gets me going. But I also know for myself that I can show up at these companies as a coach in a different form. And I'm helping through leadership development, whether it's people development or whether it's, strategy or our next big growth bet. It gives me a little bit of that stage and just brings me joy every day because I know it's important to me now. And, it took me a while to figure it out, but, the recipe of transferable skills, networking and being intentional about it and not being shy about that. And thirdly, just taking ownership of something and sort of running with it was the recipe that's worked in terms of getting me there. So it's been a fun run.
That's great. Yeah, lots of consistent themes here from leveraging your network to your underlying experience that you got while you were in the military, to your passion, right? Things you're passionate about, Scott, whether it's about your truck or working on the farm and things like that. It's really finding what you're passionate about or helping people. So I think it's not a straight line, and I think that's another good kind of takeaway from kind of this discussion. So one of the things I'd like to ask, and maybe we can go to Doug, is so when you think about where people might start, right? So you all kind of went through your starting points, but if you're giving advice to someone else about where they might start, how would you advise our audience here where they might start and how they think about starting?
Well, that's a difficult question. You had to start with me, didn't you? I think really you have to look in the mirror. You really have to take a look in the mirror and ask yourself, who am I and what do I want to do? And then what are the steps that you as an individual want to take? And then put a plan together. That plan I will tell you right now, you can have the most perfect plan. It will never go off exactly the way you define it, but at least get it down on paper saying, like myself, when I volunteered to get involved in quality, I took that was a pivot. I pivoted real quick, but it used that to leapfrog me into quality, right? In the automotive industry. So taking a look at yourself, really understanding what do I want to do in your career, whether it's tech or it could be something else. I've only been in tech now for 12 years. When I did hire in a Chrysler, I worked in vehicle engineering. So I was, helping develop the cars and trucks that are out there on the roads. And I remember being in a meeting, and I've always had this interest in technology, or I'll say IT. And I remember being in a meeting, we were talking about a convergence vehicle, and there was somebody from IT that was supporting engineering. And the stuff that he was talking about was just an absolute interest to me. And I'm like, wow, that would be very cool to start maybe navigating over to more of technology. Not that engineering is not technology. I mean, there's a lot of technology in engineering, but really from an IT, right? Information technology. So it really sparked an interest. And at that point is when I started to build my network, right? So take a look in the mirror, understand what you want to do, pivot, start to build your network, because those are the avenues in which things will open up from a career standpoint. And prior to getting out of the military, it's stressful. It is. I know Jen, talked about taking 2 years off because she was burned out, and it's going to be very similar. It's a lot of stress getting out and transitioning to the civilian world, but put a plan down, really understand who you are, and great things will happen. And don't be shy. That is one of the things that when you're working and talking to other individuals, don't be shy about what you want to do, right? Because that will always lead to new development opportunities for you. Whether you're coming in as a entry level, that you never know what that will lead to next, right?
Thank you. Well, Alan, let's jump over to you. Can you share with us your kind of thoughts and takeaways for recommendations of where they might start, but also what type of roles? I know you knew you wanted to go into sales. That seems pretty specific. How did you know, and where do you recommend people might start?
Yeah. Thank you, Laura. Much like Douglas said, I think two things come to mind that I would love to equip veterans is one, have a bias for action. And so like, if you're just stepping in new, like think of when you were entering the military and you're trying to understand military before you enter it. There's just you're entering a whole new paradigm when you're entering the business world. And so it's really hard to contextualize or understand the full context of what a role does, and what the daily activity looks like just sitting in your seat or reading at home. You really need to have a bias for action. So one kind of key thing I would do very specifically is go out and just do informational interviews with a lot of people in a lot of different roles. And so coming out the military, I knew I wanted to be on the revenue side because I knew I'm very extroverted. I wanted to be around people. I knew I didn't want to be, in the fluorescent lights, as Jennifer said. I wanted to be in front of people's faces. And so I knew that, but sales is such a large thing. Getting into SaaS sales is even more specific and takes a lot of experience. But as I started to do informational interviews with all different types of roles in industries, from investment banking to consulting to product management, as much as I could, it kind of gave me a little bit of understanding of the type of role, given my capabilities, that I would kind of have some synergy in. Second, so do that, bias for action with just that. Secondly, I would say have a growth mindset around things. I think Ryan was sharing it. Is this whole mindset around I'm going to look for opportunity. I'm just going to jump into opportunities and learn. And so I would encourage that as you are starting to enter the business world, it's very important that you understand a whole new lingo. The business world talks in capital markets frameworks, and when you make your case via a business case, and there's an ROI attached to that, and it comes down something to an ROI. And so being able to speak in those languages, you have to have a growth mindset around learning the frameworks that allow you to be able to expound on how your project connects the dot to the strategic goals. And so what I did very specifically is I started to download and read as many McKinsey reports as I could. I would read them all. I would read 10Ks. If I was interviewing at a company or doing an informational interview with a colleague at Facebook, I would read the 10K of the Facebook to understand their business and understand how they work in their ecosystem. So those are the two things: is growth mindset and a bias for action is what I would encourage people to do.
Great, thank you. Well, I'm going to jump back to Ryan for a moment, because I think when we were talking, a lot of this has been so far about maybe exploring what the opportunities are. I think when we chatted, you also said something about knowing what you don't want to do. Do you want to share that? It's kind of knowing what you want to do, knowing what you don't want to do.
Yeah. I'm trying to remember.
That's
There's lots of things I don't want to
That's
do.
okay.
But I think it
How do they
aligns with
roles? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it aligns with a lot of what the other folks are saying around trying to figure out what it is you're good at and trying to figure out what value can you bring on day one, knowing that you'll learn the other bits to continue to add value along the way. And so, a process of elimination is always a good way. I knew, as an example, I did not want to do sales. And so, opposite of Alan, I'm an introvert. I hate people. To be, if I could be frank. And so, engineering or operations or finance, where I'm dealing a little bit more with spreadsheets or factories or processes, are things that kind of I was drawn towards. And so, being able to have that process of elimination, really around the goal of narrowing in on, what the others have talked about. What am I good at? What value can I bring, and what am I passionate about? The fact that you're in the automotive panel right now and listening to us, it could be automotive, it could be sports, it could be something, but having those informational interviews and honing in on things by eliminating other things is really ultimately what you're trying to do. You're trying to give yourself the highest probability of landing something that you could be good at and passionate about, and that it aligns with the plan that Doug mentioned. And then you'll develop a new plan after that. You'll adjust to the reality of your situation, and you'll learn. And you may get into a sales role or a program management role or an operations role and say, oh, wow, I do not like this. And that's okay. Like you can adjust course again, but you're always learning, always growing, like others have said. And again, using that process of elimination, like you mentioned, Laura, I think are really great tactics and strategies.
Yeah, I think it comes down to having the confidence, right? Know what your skill set is, know what you're excited about, and know what you're not excited about.
Exactly.
Ryan, we won't call you for a sales job. All right. So Scott, your background, I know you grew up sort of, hanging around automotive on the farm. But do you really think that folks here need automotive background? Do you think it's important that they have that experience, or do you think it's easy to transition into that role? What's your thought?
So I think it really depends on the position. I think in the direction that the automotive industry is going with all the change that we've all talked about, I think it's more about kind of what Brian had just talked about knowing where your interest is and where your strengths are and what you don't want to do. And you can transition just about any role into the automotive industry. You can go from an engineer, whether you're working on aircraft or ships or anything like that. And you can transition that and say, I can take those skill sets and I can put them in the automotive industry. Program management, IT, all of that stuff. Where I work particularly is not, I'm working on supply chains and I'm working on material cost. That's not, it doesn't matter if it's an alternator or if it's a sail for a sailboat or if it's an engine for a motorcycle. It's all kind of the same types of processes, if you will, to do supply chains and shipping and all that kind of stuff. So I think it's not necessarily needed if you understand where your strengths are and you can look to translate those into the automotive industry.
Excellent. Thank you. So Jen, I would like to go and just ask you, and actually each one of you, if you could share, what types of offerings and programs for, or services does your company offer for the military community? Jen?
Yeah, really comprehensive. In tech, we always speak in acronyms. So we've got two for you here today. One is, our MVP program, our Military Veterans Partner Program, essentially does a little bit of everything. We're here to help answer your questions. We mentioned informal interviews, like give us a call. We'll tell you what it's like to work at Uber. We'll talk to you about what it's like to train, develop, support, and get you onboarded to the company. And really the mission, is to do all those things. Secondly, we have an employee resource group. We call these our ERGs. We have these for all things. We have a Veterans at Uber group, similar as well, where again, primary focus is to hire as many people as possible, but also develop, support, onboard, top talent. I think, one of the things that we love about military community, spouses, is that there's a ton of diversity. We're always trying to make sure as an executive at Uber that we have diversity of opinion, diversity of skill set in general. And I think that that's a big part for us in general. So we're trying to build on that as much as possible. And look, we have great use cases where in terms of roles you mentioned earlier, one of our first hires last year was Michael Bett, who basically came in and is now running our programs for us at Uber to be able to help and recruit and train. And so lots of good ideas and lots of big programs that we're pushing forward with super aggressive goals to try to make sure that we're targeting in general, because look, again, we're super disruptive, innovative company, and we bring a whole new spin to what auto means these days. So we think we have a good program to support that.
Yeah, auto has a pretty broad definition these days, right? You've even got electric vertical takeoff and landing and
Totally.
unmanned aircraft in automotive. So the space has grown quite a bit. I'm going to jump back to Scott. What does Ford do for this space? What services are provided?
Thanks, Laura. So we have been, we work with the SkillBridge program and the Corporate Fellowship program to take transitioning veterans. Right now, they can use their last 90 to 120 days and do basically a paid internship with Ford. So we are working closely with those programs to do that. And by the way, that's all on your military side. So Ford is really bringing you in to give you the experience and the training and work with you to get you ready for employment. With the intent at the end of the program that if you want to continue and then you're a fit for Ford, that you become a full-time employee. So that's one of the things that we're doing. We're working extensively, as Jen had mentioned, with our recruiting, but also our retention. So our working with mentorships and growth opportunities within the company of our veterans that are currently employed. And we're looking at, different, we have different programs in place to help those members that are still part of the military in the Guard and the Reserve forces that are deploying and make sure that we're watching out for their best interests back here with Ford.
Great, thank you. Doug, how about Stellantis? Would you like to share with us the programs that Stellantis has in place, or one or two of them?
Yeah, so at Stellantis, we have a veterans recruiting program. For those out there, you can actually, if you want to learn more, it's at careers.fcagroup.com/veterans. And you can go there and you can search for jobs, you can create a profile, and you can actually start applying for jobs out there. But the company itself, just a couple things I'll add to that. I know Jen mentioned the ERG. We call them BRGs here, business resource groups. We have many of them, and one of them is veterans. And it's employees get together, and we do many things. One, we support one another, right? Individuals potentially going through a difficult time. Maybe they have a hard time transitioning, right? Could be a new hire. And we also go out and reach out and support our veterans outside of Stellantis with this group. One thing I remember in the military, and I haven't found it in the business world yet, there's a camaraderie in the military that you'll never get in the business world. And our BRG allows us to get together and have that camaraderie that I know I miss from no longer being in the military, because when you're in the military, and everybody knows this, you're relying on the person to your left and right. So this BRG group of veterans, we definitely lean on one another and we support others out there. And our leadership at Stellantis is very convinced that the skills that everybody's learned in defense of our country can contribute importantly to our overall business goals. So definitely go out there, take a look, careers.fcagroup.com/veterans. Take a look. And if you see something that has an interest, definitely apply.
Thank you. All right, so I would like for Ryan and Alan both to share with us their companies, and then we'll go in a couple moments over to some questions that have come in. So Ryan, you want to go first and just share what does Waymo provide?
Yeah, Waymo, like I mentioned before, is part of Alphabet, and so we leverage a lot of Alphabet and Google's programs. And so the ERG that is putting this whole event on, the Veterans Network, is Alphabet's ERG and VetNet, and Waymo very much participates in that. Careers.google.com is a great place, and there's veteran resources there to navigate and think through where best. Waymo itself is we're actually a new company. We're a startup within Alphabet, and so we are now bringing up some of these diversity type programs ourselves, and in parallel leveraging the massive infrastructure and commitment really that Alphabet has put in place. So just a wealth of resources in Alphabet for veterans to navigate.
Absolutely. Alan, would you like to share what Tesla's doing?
Yeah, so very similar. One thing I would just share is that Tesla has a very gritty culture. And so a lot of military people coming into Tesla will be like, oh man, this is just like the military. So just putting that out there. We have a ERG group called Tesla Veterans. It's a big group. We're very close. Like Douglas said, we support one another to give us that kind of team camaraderie. One thing I would just put out there, it's led by a guy named Dirk. He was a KC-135 pilot. So pilots are just leading out here in Silicon Valley, but he's the head recruiter. And one thing with Tesla is that when coming in, particularly the Tesla veterans thinks very all across the company when looking for the right role for a military person. It isn't just manufacturing jobs. We look at the full organization. Some people we've hired, in corporate development, and on the autonomous pilot, software team, technical program manager. And so we look all across the company when looking at candidates. And so you can contact me directly, amcclinton@tesla.com, and I will get you connected right away. I would love to. So. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you. Well, I heard a consistent theme throughout for both finding something as well as once you're in the company, and it's networking. So I think that's true. Use your network and your relationships that you know and your skills that you have. I want to go over to Dory now. We've got a couple of questions that have been submitted. All right. So let's see what we have here on Dory. All right. From JW, what sort of education is needed to work as a project or program manager in the automotive industry? Hard skills versus soft skills. Who would like to take that?
So I'll take a first shot at it, Laura, if you don't mind. And first, I want to say that Ford, I was remiss. I missed that we actually do have a veterans group as well. It's an ERG. That does all that stuff. So hard skills versus soft skills program manager, that's actually what I came in to Ford as, and then moved over into the IT side. So I would say you need a lot of hard skills around, program management practices, so PMI practices around, understanding that. A PMP is definitely very helpful, not necessarily required in a lot of places. Soft skills, though, is really a lot of that stuff I think that we all kind of get in the military at all levels, which is, your communication skills, your leadership skills, your ability to go out there and bring teams together and move them forward towards a common goal. Because there's a lot of coordination that goes along with it and across a lot of different skill teams.
Jen, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, soft skills, we have a lot of program project ops sort of managers at Uber. It makes up probably the largest percentage of functional roles at Uber. So in terms of hard skills, agree with Scott. I'd say just adding to the soft skills, look, it depends on the size of the company. If you're working at a startup versus, our company, which I'd call mid-size, around 9,000 to 11,000 people versus, Google, which is, quite a large company right now, you're going to need to be able to manage the matrix, right? So at the end of the day, it's about being able to navigate lots of different personalities, and really knowing yourself around whether you're a people person or you're a task person. And with program managers and project managers, you kind of need to be a little bit, you need to be good at both in some ways. So just on the soft side, just really being aware around, navigating different expectations, prioritization, really understanding how to take ownership, and also just deal with persuasion and influence internally in terms of meeting deadlines, things like that. So all of those skills are necessary. It's one of those really jack of all trades roles that I see across the company, that's super interesting, but also is a great launch pad for other different types of functional roles.
Excellent. Anyone else?
I was just going to say, add to that, to give like a comparison. I compare it to the S3 role in the military, like that S3 role where that shop has to look all across the battalion and manage key stakeholders. They don't really own the resources, but they have to influence the resources. It's tremendously a lot of the work a program manager has to do. I would also just put out there Lean Startup, that book that really helped me, I would say in a Silicon Valley context, that really helped me just kind of understand how innovation is actualized, iterated, and developed in Silicon Valley. And a lot of companies kind of use that, or they've built off of that framework. Is helpful for a program manager to know.
Great, thank you. I think we have another question. Did we have a second question there? All right. How do smart cities and new urban installations impact the auto industry? Ooh, good question. These are tough questions, you guys. Good. And what skills would a veteran looking to get into AVs learn to be able to enter into the industry? All right, we have a couple of different folks. All of you, anybody would like to take that? Who'd like to start?
Sounds like Rayton Ryan's wheelhouse.
I can try. It's interesting. Smart
Ryan?
cities.
Hey, Alan.
Yeah.
Jen.
Yeah.
I can start and then welcome people to add on there. But from a smart cities perspective, I think what you'll find is these two industries. I would say they're different industries that are likely to converge at some point, or at least work together. But they're certainly running in parallel right now. And the way that we're approaching the AV problem, if you will, is to be able to navigate the current dumb cities, if you will, and that it's really hard. And we're not going to wait for the cities to make it easier for us. Actually, we're from Google's or Waymo's perspective, we're actually trying to bring up ride hailing in San Francisco today because we believe it's the hardest environment that we can do, and it's the hardest application for our autonomous system. And so, tackling the hard problem will allow us to draft and then ultimately work well within a smart city framework. And it's an industry that companies like Alphabet are playing in as well. With one of our subsidiaries called Sidewalk Labs is very, very much working on that problem today. But we don't work closely with Sidewalk Labs here at Waymo. We're both working on independent problems that someday may converge. So that's how I would address at least the smart city part of that question.
Great.
Yeah, I can go ahead, Doug.
I was going to add to that. One of the things I find all the focus is on the cities and stuff, but the infrastructure, even in the rural area, is going to be interesting in how this all plays out, right? So it's Stellantis. It's kind of interesting. We're made up of a lot of brick and mortar brands and factories, and we're actually transitioning, and it's difficult. I may get burned out like Jen, but we're transitioning as a software company. It just happens to make cars. So it is definitely this change in the mindset that I'm sure Scott could even talk to it, from a Ford perspective. Tesla's already there, right? They're already playing in that space, but it's going to be interesting, right? From an infrastructure standpoint when it comes to autonomous, and then how quickly can some of the old brick and mortar like Ford and Stellantis pivot into more of a software company, just so happens to make cars.
Jen, did you want to speak to that, or Scott?
Yeah, Scott, why don't you go first and I'll build on that. Go for it.
I was going to say, and the third point I kind of put on to both Ryan and Doug's, comments is that data is at the bottom of all of it, or at the top of it. However you want to look at it, it's driving everything. So, as smart cities continue to emerge and as AVs continue to emerge, and you see that convergence, as Ryan kind of talked about, you're going to see the sharing of data back and forth. So there's going to be extra or additional infrastructure that's going to need to be in place to facilitate that sharing. So data is growing exponentially. That today the amount of data that's being shared is probably 100 million times more than what it was 30 years ago. So I think data is the play if you're looking at how do you get into this industry. It's around some type of data and data sharing.
Yeah, and I'll close by saying, listen, Uber is playing a major role in smart cities as well, whether it's AV, EV. It's bringing the key points are if you just Google search like KPMG, Deloitte for like mobility ecosystem, you're going to see the interdependence between everything about to merge. So the thing that's important for all of you to think about is like all of these companies, there's a whole set of startup companies coming in and there's a bunch of incumbents, right? And they're all starting to try to work together. So for example, my job is to do partnerships with everybody on this call. So like something for you to think about is like, how are we all coming together to solve for this problem and to innovate, to make cities smarter is a really interesting thing. And so for you to come to the table and say, well, I don't know how to get into AV. Well, it's a new industry. None of us know that much about AV. It's all brand new. So at the end of the day, I always say industry is your shortest learning curve. And number two, it's really about what do I like functionally? Am I going to do a people job like Alan, or am I going to do an analytical job, in general? Know yourself. And then figure out what stage of company, because you may go crazy working for an early stage company because you thrive in structure, and you may want to go work for an incumbent instead. So really knowing whether you're coming into the big companies or whether you're coming into the small disruptors is really going to matter culturally for you in terms of your decision. And when you're doing your informal interviews, keep that in mind, because there are about 50 companies you could enter right now that are tackling AV through different lenses and different avenues. And doing that research is going to be really important. And then understanding, yourself in terms of functional role and what customers you want to serve is going to be really important.
That's such great advice. I love it. Thank you all. We're unfortunately out of time for our panel. We could have probably been here for another hour, but thank you everyone for joining. I found all of the stories here really fascinating and insightful. I'm sure the audience did as well. We appreciate you giving back to those military community interested in automotive. To those watching, this is the last industry panel session for the day today. We encourage you to log into the live stream tomorrow at 9 a.m. Pacific time, 12 p.m. ET, for a series of inspiring executive fireside chats. They'll include, of course, Alphabet Google CFO, the CMO of America's region of Google, and Google's Chief Diversity Officer, as well as the president of Google.org. They'll be talking with executives from Procter & Gamble, Walmart, Uber, and the CEO of Johnson & Johnson. So again, they'll also talk to you about keys to successful entrepreneurship. So if you decide you want to go that entrepreneurship path as well, that's an option. And so until then, we say thank you and have a great evening.